here. But she said that Herman always treated her with a lot of respect. She had no complaints about anything. She said that she was treated as well as she could ever expect. And she said not everything always worked out, sure. She said we had our ups and downs, but she said we certainly never had any fights or discussions or anything like that. She said had disagreements, sure. She said everybody has disagreements, but she said nothing ever serious at all, nothing ever serious. And so that was kind of interesting to note. And she didn't think anything of the fact that she was only 14 when she got married. Apparently a lot of kids at that age got married. That's why they had little girls, so that they could marry little boys. The only thing is, in this case here, the man was almost old enough to be her father. But she said it worked out just fine. And that she had no complaints. And but it was interesting. Now, I know that they used to sit here and talk, apparently, according to what Marion says, or Marion would be ironing, and she would just sit and talk and listen. And Marion would prepare she had cookies or want tea, Grandma said she'd just take some hot water. And she found out that if you liked hot water, I found out afterwards that was true. She preferred hot water to tea. So, okay, that was a little bit of something different. And, but also, and that, the strange thing about it is that Amelia gave Marion her spinning wheel. The Grambua spinning wheel she gave to Marion. It's right here. I can see it from where I sit. Now, that spinning wheel was purchased, my dad said, about a year before his mother died. There were 3 families that sent to Germany at the same time and had 3 spinning wheels ordered, or sent money to get 3 spinning wheels before they knew the man over there who made them in Germany. His family got one, the Grambua family got one. Now the Schott family, Amelia's parents bought one, and then there was another one called the Raring family. There were 3 of those machines that came at the same time. And Amelia learned how to card and spin wool from her mother. And so when she went into the Grambua house, there was this spinning wheel, and she knew how to operate it. And she did a lot of spinning, and she did a lot of knitting, made winter clothes for all the kids, socks and sweaters and gloves and caps and many things. And that's interesting, but I don't know why she didn't give it to Martha, or why she didn't give it to Irma, or Otto, or Dora, or Henry, or somebody, but she gave it to Marion, and we still have it. Beautiful. Now, I also have Grandpa Grambua's 45-60 rifle, the Winchester. I have it hanging here on the mantel. I can see it from here. It was given to Dad, and then Dad gave it to me. That rifle was bought with a couple deer hides and a $10 bill from a peddler. These peddlers used to come around, and they had this particular peddler at that time. Dad said he had about 4 or 5 rifles. This was called the Custer rifle. Now, Custer didn't use it at Little Bighorn because that rifle didn't get out into the field. It was the same year, it was 1876, that he got wiped out. But this rifle came out of the factories in 1876. I used it to hunt. I shot several deer with it, but then I retired it. But that rifle was bought from these peddlers. These peddlers would come around, and they had this variety of items to sell. And I know that they would come around sometimes. I know on one occasion or 2 that I recall, they came over to the Gramberg farm, where I spent a lot of time with my grandfather Gramberg and Grandma Gramberg, they came late in the evening, they would stay overnight. And I was always fascinated that when they came to the evening meal, they had this little skull cap on, part of the Jewish tradition. And these fellas could speak fluent German. And of course, so it was very, very easy thing for him to speak to mother and dad, mother and grandpa and grandma Dramberg. And they could converse in German. Now, I also remember that Dad said that when he bought that rifle from this fella, he gave him 2 ox hide and $10. Now, $10 that he gave him was gold, a gold piece, $10 gold piece. You got to remember, at that time, gold was still a very common form of exchange. It was completely legal. Well, I remember that gold was still legal up until about 1933, when the gold was called in. But before that, you could go to the bank, and if you had $100 in silver, you had $100 in paper, you could say that you wanted 5 $20 gold pieces. Or you could get $5 bills, $5 gold pieces, or you could get 2 50 gold pieces. Gold was a just common exchange. It is no longer legal to do that now. It was called in, but there are a lot of gold that is still in the vaults of this country, and a lot of people have them as pieces. They're much more valuable now than they were then, because gold today is around $350, $380 an ounce. So you can get a good price for that little chunk of $20 worth of gold if you wanted to go and sell it. But that's just part of the story. You didn't get much in those days in the way of wages. Dad said that later on. Now you say, well, how did you make a living? What did you do to earn money? Well, it was hard. He said it was hard to earn money unless you worked for somebody else. And so he said in the wintertime, after he got to be about 14, his dad hired him. His dad did some lumbering, certain 40s or 80s of land that he had contracted with to lumber, to take the timber off. And Dad was hired as a teamster to drive and take the team of horses, took it to camp. Now the camp, Dad said that he attended was south of Schrader's Corner in Metz Township, probably about 2 miles in the area of the Urbans and the Skiers, and down along the river, across the river, in very, very heavy timbered area. Our dad had a camp in there that he put up, and he had probably 10 or 15 guys, and there were 2 or 3 teams of horses, and they took these pine and other timbers down and loaded them on sleighs, and his job was to drive a sleigh, drive the team. The logs, sometimes they were the full-length logs, sometimes they're parts of logs, were loaded on, and his idea was you took it right straight in, right into what you call Nowitzki's Landing over there near Uncle Henry. That would have been a haul of about 5 miles, roughly. And then you went to that landing, and there you had to unload that. There was a couple fellows there that were stationed there, and they would help you unload that. It was unloaded into large piles, and from the piles it was put on gondolas or flat cars and then taken to Alpena or the other mills. But his job was to drive that team, take care of that team at night, see that that team were combed down, dressed and fed, and he said he got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and make sure that those animals were fed. And he said there were 2 or 3 other fellows, there were young fellows, there were about 3 of those young fellows, that's all they did was drive team. And then, of course, he said there were times when they'd get, the weather would be very, very bad, where they would just have to kind of sit in camp for a while. He said they did get home on weekends occasionally, but a lot of times they worked right through Saturdays. But he said it was rough, it was tough, but you made $1 a day in your room and board. The food was good. He said they had a woman cook. She did the cook. She cooked in a little shanty. There was kind of a kitchen area. It had a lunchroom attached to it. They had a bunkhouse where probably about a dozen fellows could sleep. And It was rough and tough, but he said that's the way life was. And then he said after a period of time, he decided that, boy, he did want to be a farmer. He didn't want to be a lumberjack. He'd like to get into something that could make a few dollars. And at that time, well, the only thing that was readily available would be to try to teach school. He went to a session of what they call the county normal for about 6-8 months. And at that time, the county normal for Presque Isle County was right here. They used some of the same school buildings that are being used, that they used for the regular school. They used in the summertime. And then later on, that county normal was moved to Onaway. But at the time that he took his training there were a lot of other young guys. There were probably a class of 25 or 30 fellas, or women and boys, that were training to be teachers, because schools were being built in right and left. I don't know how many schools there were in Presque Isle County, but in the immediate area here, there were probably, in the three township area, there were probably about 15 schools. And then there were schools in other areas, that is, were, say, the Onaway, Behringer Township, Akia, Case, Alice. So there was a good supply. Now, what you did there, you took a course of training under the direction of teachers who were certified by the state, and then you could go out and teach these one-room schools for a period of a year. Then you had to go back to school. Now, when you would say you went back to school, then you had to attend one of the teacher training institutions of the state. You went to Central, or you went to Eastern, or maybe you went to Michigan State, or went to the University of Michigan. They had what they call these high school graduate courses, where people would be admitted, and for summer school purposes. They would go to summer school for 6-8 weeks, and then they'd get recertified for another year. Well, in time, you see, going year after year after year after year, a lot of those people eventually got degrees. And some of those people not only got degrees in education, but some of those fellas, the same people that my dad started out with, became doctors, they became lawyers, they became dentists. The schools admitted these people on the basis of, we'll let you in, see what you can do. If you cut the mustard, you can stay. And people that I knew actually started out that way. They started out with just not even high school training. Well, Dad didn't have any. And I know fellows in town here that became dentists. One of them even became, was on the faculty of the University of Michigan later on. Others became engineers. I know several of them that became engineers. Because that's the only thing they could do. That's the only way you could give these people a chance. It was something like almost like a GI Bill. If you could cut the mustard, okay. Well, Dad decided, he went to Central along about 1899, 1900, and came back, and he taught school at the Gabrishak School, which was over there near the Flying Duck Bar near Posen. He taught at the Wisniewski School, which is over there near the Dumsch Farm in Bismarck Township, about 5 miles away from home. Then he taught school right at the Grambua School. Now, it's interesting to note that when he taught at the Grambua School, 1903, I think it was 3 and 4, 4 and 5, 5 and 6. 6 was the last year. His students included his brothers and sisters. He had Willie, he had Ed, he had Otto, and he had Martha and Irma as his students. He didn't have mother. He missed mother by one year. She was teaching in 1906. She was already out of school, 14, I guess, or what it was, and she was working at the general store in Metz. But he did have Bertha Dramberg, he did have Louise Dramberg, he did have Dora Dramberg, and he had Carl Dramberg. And then he had a good number of the Hardees people, of the Ed Hardees family, and Henry and Adolf and Ed. And he had other people that Uncle Herbert Hine was, and his sisters were a couple of his students. They all came to the school, the Grambua school. That was within 2-3 miles walking distance. That's where most of them came. And so it's interesting how this stuff develops. But then, as I say, he went back and decided he had talked things over with his dad, and his dad told him that if he wanted to make any money, he better find something else to do except go into education. That if he made money, he'd have to go into business, or become a storekeeper, or become a doctor, or a lawyer, or a dentist, or something like that. And if he didn't want to farm, or he didn't want to be a lumberjack, those were his choices. And so he went to Ferris Institute. Ferris had just opened up. And it's interesting to note that when he went to Central was just a young institution. Central had started about 1892. Started as a private school, and then in 1895 it became a state school. 1895, and Dad went there in about 1900 for several years. And then when he went to Ferris, that was another one of those situations. Ferris had been started in 1884 by Woodbridge Ferris as a kind of a training school for pharmacy and for banking. And then in 1899, it became Ferris Institute. And shortly after he came in 1899, the Dad went there. And Woodbridge Ferris was on the faculty. Of course, he owned the institution. And he had Woodbridge Ferris as one of his instructors in business. And Ferris later on was governor of Michigan for a period of 4 years, between 1912 and 1916. And then after that, between 1923 and 28, he was United States Senator for Michigan. And now, after he took that summer class, he came home. He didn't know really what to do, and he found out that the banker here, Mr. Osgood, Charles Osgood, and his wife Ellen, who were running the bank, had advertised for somebody to come and work at the bank for a period of time, temporary job. So it looked like a good opportunity, so he went in and inquired about it, and they gave him a job right then and there. And so that was 1907, that's when he started working at the bank, and the temporary summer job, starting in 53. Isn't that something? Period of 44 years. And so that's how he got into that. That's how he got into the banking business. But it's interesting to note. But there again, he said also even banking wasn't a high-paying job, but it was certainly a better-paying job than it had been to stay with education. But he enjoyed the work and enjoyed being that he could stay right here in this area. He said he did have opportunities at time to go to other communities for banking purposes. In other words, people offered to take him into their institutions in other communities. And now he didn't tell me exactly where, but I found out one of them later on was Dowagiac. Now, just what the attention was in Dowagiac, I don't know. But nevertheless, I remember him saying that. But I think that the bank examiners that came around from the state of Michigan would know of places where they were looking for people. And the Dad said that he got pretty well known as an evaluator of land. He, being a farmer, he had a pretty fair idea of land values and timber values and stuff of that kind. So these examiners liked after they saw where the loans were. I mean, sometimes the examiners would want to see what the land looked like where the loans had been made on, and so Dad would have to take them out, and he showed them what these farms looked like, and these fellows were impressed that the land on which the loans had been made was very, very good. And so it's kind of an interesting just comment on the side. Now just a little side issue here that I think I'll comment on just in case, give you the information that I have on it, and that's in regard to Grandpa Grambua, Herman Grambua's sister Ernestine, who lived in Fairfield, Nebraska. When the Grambua family came over from Germany, they settled first near Tonawanda, New York, or Buffalo. And while they, I don't know just exactly what they were doing there, but they were working there. The story is that for a while Herman worked on the Erie Canal on one of those boats, which is probably right. And while there, the sister Ernestine met a young fellow by the name of Joe Johns. He was from England, from Cornwall, England, and he had come over just about the same time, and he was living in that area. And they met, and apparently decided right then and there to get married. And so they did. And now, Herman knew this Joseph Johns, because I have a tintype, which I'm sure some of the other people have, of him, that was taken in New York State. And so they were married, and they went, instead of going out to Michigan, they went out to Fairfield, Nebraska, where he had a homestead. And that's where they lived. Now, as far as I know, Ernestine never came to Michigan. I have no record of that. And the thing is that nobody has a picture of her. I checked with Gerald Grambua, and he said he never saw one. And I know that I'd asked my mother previous years before, and she never ever remember seeing one. Now, Joseph Johns came to Michigan on a couple of occasions. This was, of course, the last time he came here was probably about 1922 or something like that, or maybe that. The twins were just small at that time, Ernestine and Therese. But he had been here before that. And they went out there. They had two children, a girl, Irma, and a boy, Art. Now, it's a little bit difficult to know just what the heck happened. But anyway, Ernestine, the wife, died June 17th, 81, the same day that her son Art was born. And he gave the child to a neighbor to take care of. I mean, because he had to have somebody that he was farming. He had to have some help. And so this neighbor farmer was McFarland. And now Joseph must have been kind of a dreamer, a little wanderlust in him anyway, but he was paying Mrs. McFarland so much a week or so much a month or whatever to take care of the child, and also the older girl. And apparently, according to what his grandson said, Joe McFarland, his grandson that I knew, and George met him back in 1927, he said that the grandfather decided one day that he wanted to take off, and he wanted to go to California to see whether possibly he would move there. Instead of farming, he would go to California. And so he continued to send money, and then all of a sudden the money stopped. And they didn't know where he was. Well, as near as I can tell, he didn't come back about 16 or 17 years later. And when he got back, of course, he was looking for his son. The family that had the son were fearful of what would happen after they had him for a good number of years, and so they sold everything out and they went and moved to Kansas, near Alameda, Kansas, and farmed down there. And by the time that Joe Johns came back, whenever that was, he came back, he couldn't find them. Nobody seemed to know where they went. Well, through his, I suppose, a little detective work on his part or whatever it was, that I don't know for just how long it was gone. It was gone anyway. He did find him down in Kansas, and the kid had gone by the name of not Art Johns, but Art McFarland, and the sister went by the name of Edna McFarland, and the sister, of course, had gotten married. And so the boy didn't want to go back. He didn't want any part of it. He wasn't going to go and change his name back to Johns. He just wanted to stay just where he was. So I guess that's what Johns finally decided. But that's one of those strange things that happened. Now this, I found out afterwards from Joe McFarland, that Joseph Don did remarry for a short period of time before he went to California. He married a lady by the name of Clara Hammer, but apparently it only lasted a couple of months, and then they were divorced. And that's maybe why he decided that he would go to California for a while, because that was in 1885. That was about 4 years after his first wife died. So now, Art McFarland had about 5 kids. And in 1927, Dad, Herman, and I, and George went out there. We went out to Fairfield, Nebraska. Joseph Johns was living in town at that time. He wasn't on the farm. He had a nice big home in town. And from there, we went on to Alameda, Kansas, and went out to the farm home of Art, his son. And we stayed there and visited, 3 or 4 days, or 5 days. They had a big farm where they were raising hogs, they were raising corn, raising sunflower, and seemed to be quite prosperous people. And we enjoyed, Herman and I enjoyed the visit out there. There were a lot of horses to ride, and there was a branch of the Red River where they went swimming. The water was kind of dark compared to Lake Huron, but nevertheless, in the evening, that's where the kids gathered. This was in the summertime. They gathered down the river to swim and have, I suppose they had lunch and meals and stuff that they had down there. And then Joseph Johns did, he as I say, he had come back on several occasions. So I just thought I'd mention. I also want to mention this, that Joseph Johns, according to Joe, also had a brother who came over from England when he did. But he kept right on going to the West Coast, and then took a ship and finally settled in Australia. Became a rancher down there of sheep or cattle, I don't know which. And that's where you get that story of somebody, some wealthy millionaire in the family. Well, but it had to be. Now, there's also a story connected with the same thing, that Herman Grambua, or Christian Grambua, had a brother. We don't know what his name was, but the story is that he settled either in Brazil or Argentina. Now that's very possible, because we do know that especially in Argentina and Paraguay and Uruguay, that there were a good number of German families that came from Germany that did settle there. Just like a lot of Germans came here, they did settle in Argentina and Paraguay and Uruguay. So that was just guessing, as far as I know. I don't think there's any proof of that, where that comes from. But that was Christian Grambua's brother. And this, of course, as far as I know, from what Dad told me, that he never came to this country at all. He just took off for South America. I suppose if you're going to leave Germany, for whatever reason, go where there was land. There was lots of land in South America also that was available. Very, very reasonable. I don't know whether they homesteaded it or not, but nevertheless, it was there to be had. Now to pick up on another angle here, I just found out something. Yesterday, I got a letter from Joe McFarland out in Norton, Kansas. I had written him and asked whether he possibly had a picture of Grandpa Grambo's sister Ernestine that he had married out and took out there to Fairfield, Nebraska. Nobody seems to have a picture of her, just like nobody seems to have a picture of Herman Grambo's first wife, Ernestine, who died at the time that Helen was born. Well, he sent back information, biographical information that I got yesterday, and they do not have a picture. Now, why that is that they didn't even have a wedding picture, I don't know. But, of course, apparently Herman and Ernestine in Metz didn't have a wedding picture either. But he did add a few things. Most of the stuff that I told you is somewhat true, although it's hard to get stories all straightened out. But Ernestine, the sister that went out there to, Herman's sister that went out there with Joseph Johns to Fairfield, died in 1881. She died very young. And she died at the time that her second child was born. 1881, that's the same year that our dad was born. So you can see that she was a very, very young girl. And Joseph Johns lived until 1940. He died at 87, and he was born in he was 87 years old at the time that he died. He was born in Cornwall, England in 1853. So that probably, if I find out more interesting things, I did get a few letters, or if you get a copy. Joseph Johns kind of wrote a little biography of himself about the year before he died, or just a couple of months before he died, and I'll give a copy of that to Gerald Grambua so that he can put it in the family files. Now, I thought as we went along here, there's just a few little things that I can still say yet that got room on that tape, things that I thought about Dad, just ramifications here, there. This doesn't follow any pattern. The sister Helen, was they say, that was raised by the Brino family. She was married. I can't think of the name of all of them, but she did have 3 children by the second wife by the name of LaChance. I saw her on 2 different occasions when she came here to Michigan, and on one occasion she had one of her daughters with her. Now, I do know that Mother and Dad did visit her one time. They went down to Chicago, and they did visit her down there, and seemed to be a kind of a happy person. Now, other things about Dad that I might just talk about here, things that I thought of as we went along. And that some of the kids might know it, but the grandchildren would be interested to know it, that your grandfather or great-grandfather, whatever the case might be, liked to smoke a pipe. He liked to smoke cigars. He didn't care anything about cigarettes. He did, however, have a habit that wasn't pronounced, but he did like to chew tobacco. He chewed a product called Sweet Burley. I asked him about that one time, how he ever got into that. Now, he didn't chew in the house, but he would when he went hunting and fishing. He had a little wad of tobacco that he'd stick in his mouth. He said, well, he said, on the farm, he said, you didn't dare smoke. He said, when you're working in the barns around all day and straw, he said, tobacco or lighting up in the vicinity of the barn was just absolutely prohibited. So he said, a lot of those farm kids, he said, they took to chewing tobacco. And he said he didn't chew leaf tobacco, he didn't chew plug tobacco. He didn't chew Copenhagen, but this was a kind of a special little blend that he liked. And whenever he used to go fishing with him or hunting with him, he'd always stick that little wad of tobacco in his mouth. It seemed to be kind of take him back to his childhood, I suppose. Dad was, I know that at one time he was a member of the choir at the Lutheran Church. He liked to sing. He could play an accordion. He did a pretty good job on an accordion. I don't know what happened to his accordion. I wonder who got it. He knew how to play a certain amount on the pipe organ, on the old hand pipe organ. Or not pipe organ, what you call a wind, that's operated by your feet. We had an organ in the house. And that organ, Mother used to play it, Dad used to play it. And then after we got a piano, they gave the organ to the St. Peter's Lutheran Church in Metz. Dad was very much interested in the community and, of course, very active in the community for all the years that he was at the bank. He was on the Board of Education of the public schools there for a period of about 22 years, between 1910 and about 1932. He was on the board when they doubled the size of the old wooden building, which is recently torn down. He was on the board when they built the old red brick high school. And he was on the board when they built the new school in 1927-28. He was on the board. So he was very much active in those affairs. At one time, he was city treasurer of Rogers City. And he was treasurer, I believe, of the St. John's Lutheran Church there for a period of maybe 25 years. He was an active member of the Red Cross for many, many years. And he and Mother were two of the people that helped organize the Parent Teachers Association in the school system years in the early 1920s when that organization first came into being. He was a member of the Chamber of Commerce, but in the early days it was called the Rogers City Businessmen's Association. And he was always active in promoting the community. I remember in talking about the years that he taught school, I questioned him about some of this thing. I said, how much money did you make? Well, he said he made anywhere from about $22 to $30 a month teaching school, and then they usually paid you additional $1 a week or $5 a month for attending the fires, for getting the wood split up and in shape so that you could keep the fire going during the wintertime, or for being the custodian, you might say, for sweeping the place out. Now, he also mentioned one thing that I forgot to mention. I said that, I told you that he one time taught the Wisniewski School, which was about 5 miles away from the Grambua home, and that frequently he would stay over for a week because in the wintertime it was a hard job traveling that 5 miles through the woods. And he said that, I said once before that Grambua had a .32 caliber pistol. And he said he took that pistol with him on several occasions when he would be walking to that Wisniewski School, because he said that occasionally he would spot a wildcat. And he said that cat would stay probably about 25 or 30 yards to the side of him going through the woods. He could see it, but it just kind of followed him for several miles through the woods, because he was going through the woods because that was the shortest way to go rather than to travel by road. He said he didn't ever know what would happen, but he said he did encounter deer, and he said occasionally he would encounter a bear, but he said they usually ran the other way. But this cat always stayed about 50 yards or 25 yards away on the side and kind of moseyed along. He said occasionally, he said there were cats that you would encounter in the woods, especially in the wintertime. He said you could see where they had killed a rabbit, or you could see where they had caught a partridge, because there would be feathers and stuff all over. And he said there were a certain number of wildcats that were in that area at that time. Now, also, I mentioned to him one time, I said, well, now, certainly I said, you didn't have very much to do with anything during the time that you were living at home. I said, did you ever consider yourself as being poor? He said, poor? He said, no. He said, He said, he said, never dawned on us. He said, we had as much as anybody else did, and that was all there was to it. He said, we didn't know who the poor were. He said, if we were poor, then we didn't know it. So he said, all these things are relative. If the other guy doesn't have much more than you did, he said, it wouldn't make much difference. Mother and Dad did do quite a bit of traveling during the years. Dad always took his vacation, and Mother and Dad usually arranged a trip someplace to go to. We know that they traveled to Alberta, Canada. They went out there to see Emma Schultz, his sister. They visited out there. They visited other places. They visited the Quebec area of Canada. They visited, they went down to Florida, Louisiana, Texas. They were out in Kansas and Oklahoma, Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri. They went out to California, I remember, in later years. They went out to see the Rose Bowl parade, I think with Grease and John. I remember 1933, Mother and Dad took Grace along. They went to Mackinac Island and took a passenger boat. They went down to the Chicago World's Fair. The boat was their hotel. They went to the fair during the day and came back to the boat at night for their hotel. That became their hotel. Then later on, they came after about 3 days there. They came back to the island, took a ferry over. The car was parked there, and they came home. They did also go to the Wisconsin, the Dells. We know that on several occasions, 2 occasions that I remember, Mother and Dad went out to North Dakota, out to the Minot area. And the bank had quite a few bank loans that they had made to farmers out there that C.H. Osgood had made. And periodically, every once a year ordinarily, Osgood went out there to take a look at those lands just to let the farmers know that they wanted these people to succeed. And a couple of occasions, Mother and Dad went out there and looked at these farms where the bank had made loans. And I might say, as far as I know, Dad said all those things finally came out. They came out all right, and they're good loans. They're people that had been loaned the money were reliable, and it's also interesting to note, if you go to the Grambua house right now over there on 3rd and Huron, that back near the garage, you'll see some a bush growing there, and it's called caragana. Those caragana plants that were alongside of the driveway going into the backyard and near the corner of the garage are still thriving. And those plants were brought back by Mother and Dad on one of their trips to the Dakotas. They were planted, they were just pulled up by the roots out of some farmer's yard. They were brought back, and they're still there today. It's called caragana. I know that Mother, later on, after Dad was gone, I know that she did go out and visited in Arizona. She did also go out and visit in Seattle. And also another place I think that Mother and Dad visited, they visited North Dakota, they visited Mount Rushmore. And I know when we went out to Kansas, Nebraska that time, we, on our way back, we did visit up into South Dakota, into Sioux City. And so they did quite a bit of traveling around as much as they possibly could. I just thought I would add that fact in there. If I think of other things, I'll put them down as we go along.